Are you able to?
Okay, welcome once again to this session. And today we do have Angel Auntie running us through the First Kings. So over to you, Angeline.
Are you able to?
Yes, Susanna, thank you so much. Hello and welcome each and every one of you for this day's session. So we had last couple of weeks where we could talk about the wisdom books. We saw about Psalms, we saw Proverbs, and we saw a lot of wisdom books, and we had a break. We saw Ecclesiastes, Job, and Song of Songs. So there were like different variety of things that we had done for the last couple of weeks. But before that, this was the timeline and the big picture of what was happening, right? So if you all remember, we saw in Act 1 that God establishes his kingdom, and Act 2 we see that mankind rebels, and then in Act 3 we saw that God chooses Israel. And when God chooses Israel, we are still there. God chooses a person, then he makes them into a nation, and the nation we now see that have asked for king, right? So when we last were talking about the nation of Israel, we saw that there were multiple kings. Israel was a chosen people, and Israel was a single united kingdom, the land, and the relationships. We're not so very sure on how it was. It was a little difficult, so I wouldn't say it was perfect. We were talking about kings. So what comes into our mind when we think about the word kings? Wow, that's a luxurious life to live. There's going to be a palace. There's going to be a power, people whom we can rule, and we can do different things. So that's what life of a king is going to be. And now we're going to see about actually the kings. So that's the, I would say, the fancy part of the kings that we know about. But let's see what actually happened in the life of the kings who ruled over Israel. We first saw that the first king chosen was King Saul. Then God chose David. Saul lost his kingship because of disobedience. Then God chose David. David had lots of ups and downs. He committed sin, but still at every point in time, he came back to the Lord. And so he was so close to God's heart. And then he was King David was told that his children, his son, and through his lineage, there'll be always somebody who's going to reign over Israel. And there was also that he wanted to build a temple for the Lord. So he wanted to build a temple for the Lord, but it was told that to King David, God told that your son, King Solomon, is going to build the temple of the Lord. So King Solomon, the third king, who was the son of King David, one of the most powerful and notable kings of Israel, he when he first encountered God, he asked for wisdom. God was so pleased with him. He did not ask for wealth or anything else. So God so liked him. He blessed him with wisdom plus wealth. And so he was very powerful. He also got the blessing of able to build a temple for the Lord. So he was so good. But what happened to this third king? We left it off by discussing before a couple of weeks, 3 weeks before, about King Saul, King David, and King Solomon, 3 kings of the undivided kingdom of Israel. They almost reigned for 120 years. They reigned from 1050 BC to 9350 BC. So this was the kingdom that we are talking about, and we will now pick it up from King Solomon. So King Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. But what happened was, when he grew old, he had a number of wives. He had so many wives. And his wives actually turned his heart after other gods. So he married wives who were worshipping different gods. So the wives told him, come on, let's worship my God. My God is better. So this moved Solomon away from worshipping the living God. So he just listened to his wives. He even built altars for the other gods because he wanted to please and make his wives happy. And then the Lord became angry with Solomon for turning away from him and offering even sacrifices to idols. So God told Solomon, since you have not kept my commands, I will tear the kingdom away from you. So that is where you can see that I was always talking about the united kingdom. The kingdom looks like the kingdom is going to become multiple kingdoms. So God tells that I'm going to tear the kingdom away from you. It's not going to be with you always. Solomon had few contemporaries. One such person, we are introducing the word. So this person is going to be a key person for today's session. Let's all remember that also. He takes notice of a very ambitious worker, and Solomon promotes him to be in charge of the entire labor force. His name is Jeroboam. Let's remember this name. The names are going to be tricky today, but let's try to remember Jeroboam. Jeroboam once was going away from Jerusalem. At that point in time, he meets a prophet, Prophet Ahijah. Prophet Ahijah meets Jeroboam, and he had a new robe on him. Prophet Ahijah does something very different. He takes the robe and tears the robe. He tears it and then tells to Jeroboam, God is going to tear the kingdom from Solomon. Just now we heard that God was angry with him for turning away from him. So he's going to tear it from Solomon, and God is going to give you 10 tribes to you. So God has picked Jeroboam, and he now talks to him through the prophet and tells him, I'm going to give you 10 tribes. If you all remember what we have spoken until now, there were 12 tribes. So of 12, 10 are going to be given to Jeroboam. So God gives promises to Jeroboam. Whenever he calls somebody for a responsibility, whenever he chooses someone, chosen people receive blessings and promises from the Lord. So here God clearly tells, you will rule over all your heart that desires. You will be king of Israel. But God says God will be with you if you walk in God's ways. God will build you a dynasty, just like David. Just like he's promised David that you'll always have someone from your family sitting on the throne. I will also make you like David. And he's saying that I will give Israel to you. The 10 tribes are going to be called Israel. This somehow came to know, Solomon comes to know about it, and he sees Jeroboam as a threat. He tries to kill him. And so Jeroboam actually flees and goes to Egypt. When Jeroboam is in Egypt, Solomon dies, and his son Rehoboam becomes king. right? So this is the tricky part that I was talking about. Now we're going to talk about two different people who have like rhyming names. Until now we were talking about Jeroboam, and now we are going to talk about Rehoboam. Rehoboam is Solomon's son. So now what happens? The people from Israel send out a note to Jeroboam, who is in Egypt, and tell them, you know what? Solomon was trying to get you killed, but now Solomon has died. And his son Rehoboam is now the king of the place. So what happens? Jeroboam meets with all the people of Israel, and there are like protesters, and they just come and try to meet the new king, Rehoboam. And what is their thing? So they come and ask and tell them, you know, your father gave us harsh labor. He treated us very harshly. Will you be better than your father or not? So actually they're saying King Solomon put harsh work on us. So his son Rehoboam, who you are our king now, will you make it easier for us or not? So Rehoboam very wisely tells you all go back, come back in 3 days. So what does Rehoboam does in these 3 days? He consults old men who advised his father, King Solomon, and asked them what to do. They are telling, you know, now if you please these people, they are going to love you forever. They will be very faithful to you and they will love to have you as their king. But then Rehoboam again also consults young men. And the young men are telling, you know what? These people are so bold and coming and telling you to make it easier for them. Don't make it easier for them. Tell them you will make it even more difficult than your father. And then Rehoboam calls the entire people, come with Jeroboam after 3 days, as he told, and come and ask, what is your answer? The king is telling, you know what? I have decided. I am going to give you harder work and harsher treatment than my father. But what happens here? The people are so upset. They don't want this at all. So the 10 tribes say, we have nothing to do with the family of David. Let's just go back to our own places. Let's go back to our houses. We don't want to consider you our king. So Rehoboam loses the faithfulness of 10 tribes. And then only 2 tribes, Judah and Benjamin, were still loyal to King Rehoboam, who is the son of King Solomon. Later, what Rehoboam was thinking, you know, shall I send somebody and bring those people back? He sends Adoniram and tells, go bring all those 10 tribes, make them again consider me to be their king. But the 10 tribes, they just kill this person to death. So they're making it very clear, you cannot be a king. Then what happens? The 10 tribes still want a king. So they decide Jeroboam is going to be their king. If you look at it, this is exactly what Prophet Ahijah told Jeroboam also, that this is God's doing, right? So Prophet Ahijah tells that God will take 10 tribes and give into your hands. And that's exactly what has happened. And Jeroboam, just as God has promised, is made king of the 10 tribes of Israel. But what has happened to the kingdom? It was until now a united kingdom. But now, what has happened to the kingdom? The kingdom has split into 2. King Saul, the first king, ruled over the undivided kingdom. Then there was David and King Solomon. But now we see son of King Solomon, Rehoboam, is now ruling over Judah. That is just 2 tribes. And then Jeroboam is now being made king of Israel of the 10 tribes, just as God promised. So just to look at a map and understand. So now we see Judah, that's in the south, and Israel, that's in the north. And Jerusalem actually is part of Judah. And we see both the kings. Rehoboam rules the southern kingdom or the kingdom of Judah, and then Jeroboam rules Israel. So it looks to be okay until now, because God decided that he is going to make Jeroboam the king. But what is this guy who was made king by God doing? King Jeroboam, who is the king of Israel, the 10 tribes, created 2 golden calf idols. Why did he create that? He's now worried that the people of Israel, whom he is now ruling, who have made him his king, might go to Jerusalem, which is now the other nation, right? In Judah. Because the temple of the Lord in those days, everybody had to go to the temple of the Lord and worship him. So he doesn't want his people to go there. Why? If his people go there, then they might think Rehoboam is our king. They might again think we want someone from King David's line. So he's now trying to retain his kingship. He says, like, I am now a king. I don't want to be pushed out of being a king. So he creates 2 golden calf idols. And he tells to the 10 tribes of Israel, Israel, these are your gods. You can start worshipping these idols. I think this just rings a bell for us, where we remember that when Moses was in the mountain for a very long time, people who were just waiting for Moses along with Aaron created a golden calf. So history repeats itself here. But it is so sad, because God promised Jeroboam that you be with me, I will be with you, I will bless you like King David. But he chose to move away from God. So he creates 2 different places idol, one in a south place in Bethel and one in the northern place he creates, so that he is now strategically thinking, my people should not go to the other kingdom, they should just stay here, they should always call me their king. So King Jeroboam started relying on his own wisdom. He forgot the God who called him and made him king. He's now scared that he wants to be a king always. He lost his faith in God. And so he completely makes a fundamental shift in worship. He made the entire people of Israel to sin so badly. So what happens whenever somebody does something wrong? God is so gracious. He still wants to tell them, come on, you're doing something wrong. So he sends a prophet, a man of God, to go and talk to King Jeroboam when he was standing in front of the calf and sacrificing. A man of God comes and tells him, come on, what you're doing is wrong. So Jeroboam, I'm now telling you that you're not going to be blessed like King David. When this man of God confronts him, the king immediately did not like it. So he lifted his hand and he tells him, seize this man of God and do something to him. But the moment he lifted his hand, if you see here, his hands became shriveled. Then he got scared. Oh, what's happening to me? Then he actually tells the man of God, please pray for me so that my hand will be restored. And actually the man of God prays and king's hand gets restored. But the king did not turn back from his evil ways. He was still continuing to live in his evil ways, even though the man of God tells him that God will forsake you if you turn away from him. So this is a small different piece. We're just a little bit moving away from the main storyline of the kings. This man of God who actually confronts the king, actually the king then, because he healed his hand, is telling, please stay and sit and eat with me. But the man of God says, God told me to come talk to you, not even take the same route back. Take a different route and go back home. That is what God told me. I will never come into your land. And then he tells this to the king very boldly and goes back. But when he's taking another route and going back home, an old person comes, old prophet. An old prophet comes and says, I am also a prophet. An angel of the Lord told me that you can come to my home and eat. It is okay. So this man of God, poor thing, believes this old prophet and goes and eats. But just as God told, after eating and drinking in the old prophet, so when he comes out, a lion kills him. The lion stands there when the man of God is lying down dead and his donkey and does not do anything. So what do we see from here? When God tells us something, even another if anybody contradicts that, tells something else other than what God tells, we should not get deceived. So this is about the powerful man of God who was sent by God to even confront King Jeroboam, who was filled with sin. But this was the end of him because he got deceived. Okay, let's come back to our King Jeroboam. King Jeroboam is still continuing his life of sin. And then what happens? His son falls ill. So now he's worried. Oh, I wanted to be king my entire life. Now what will happen if my son is not there? If he is dead, what will happen to me? I want him to be the king. So he sends his wife to the prophet Ahijah. Who is prophet Ahijah? If you remember, the one who tore the robes and told him that God is going to make you king. So Jeroboam's wife goes to Ahijah and says, my son is sick. What do you think will happen? She actually deceives, not tells, but the old prophet knows that it's Jeroboam's wife, and he tells, you know what? God chose you to be king of Israel, but you turned away from God. You made Israel, entire Israel, also to sin against God, and so your son will be dead, and God will not be with you and will not take your lineage forward. So with that, Jeroboam's wife was so sad. She leaves, and when she goes back and puts her feet on the house, immediately the boy dies. So this was what happens. Jeroboam was appointed king through prophet Ahijah. And here we see again prophet Ahijah also telling him that you turned away from God. So now there is a little shift. We are now going back to the other kingdom. Which kingdom is that? The king of Judah. Hope you are able to relate. Now we're talking about two different kingdoms, right? So we saw the split, Rehoboam and Jeroboam. Now we're coming back to the kingdom of Judah, where we see Solomon's son Rehoboam was ruling. After Rehoboam died, his son Abijah also ruled. But both Rehoboam and Abijah were not obeying the Lord. That's what we'll have to remember. Okay. But then comes another king who is the son of Abijah, who's King Asa. This is one glimmer of hope. After so many kings who did not even turn and look to God, Asa was one person who still comes in the line of David, who almost lived a life like King David. He turned to the Lord. What did he do? He removed all the idols. He removed all the idols his father and grandfather had placed there. He commanded the people to worship God. He turned his heart to God, and he also commanded his people to worship God. He actually built and fortified the cities of Judah so that it becomes prosperous. And then his heart was loyal to God. He even removed his grandmother from being a queen because she was worshiping another god, Asherah. She was having an idol and she was worshipping the idol. So even his own grandmother, Maacah, he removed her from being queen. So this was one good person whom we see in the line of King David, who was ruling the southern kingdom, a good one, and he was king for 41 years. Okay, so again, we are going to make a big shift. We are again going back to the other kingdom, the northern kingdom. So this is where we see Solomon, Rehoboam, Abijah, and Asa. And we go back to kings of Israel. I don't want to talk about many kings of Israel, but Jeroboam was the first king of Israel. He was the one who put the golden calves, and then his son also was following the same thing. He was killed by a person called Baasha. Then Baasha called himself as king. So these are different kings who come up. And then after Baasha, son of Baasha becomes king, then he is killed by another conspirator, Zimri. And then we see there's another person called Omri who comes. But all of them were bad. That is the only thing we'll have to remember. The king of Israel, starting from Jeroboam, first king, till now, none of them turned back to the Lord. So everybody was still not at all with the Lord. So this is just a timeline. We can see a happy smiley. We're going to see about so many other kings also later in the next session also. This is just a timeline that you see. And whenever the kings did something wrong, God actually still tried to tell them, come on, you're doing something wrong through the prophets. He sends prophets to confront kings and tell them what they're deviating from. So this is another pictorial thing that is just liked, because you see a lot of color coding there, right? If you look down, green is a righteous king and red is an evil king, right? So they're like evil, evil, and really evil. And if you look at it here, I'm just zooming it up for you all. Jeroboam was bad, then Ahijah, till Omri we saw. We are going to talk about this one person now, Ahab, for quite some time. He was worse than everybody in this line. Jeroboam was the worst king who created the golden calf, right? For the 10 tribes. And Ahab was very, very worse. He was worse than anybody. He even married Jezebel, who was actually worshipping Baal. And they even built a temple for Baal inside the kingdom of Samaria. So this was going from having an idol, now they're having a temple for an idol also. It has gone to worse. At this time, God sends a powerful prophet, Elijah. So let's see what happens when the prophet confronts this evil king Ahab.
Oh, it is a beautiful temple, Ahab.
A beautiful temple for a beautiful queen. I hope now you won't be so homesick for Phoenicia. Here you can worship your god Baal whenever you desire. And perhaps you will finally embrace your new home with me here in Israel.
Is Baal to be worshipped by me alone, Ahab? Because I grow weary of your people's talk of there being only one true God.
Your God is being worshipped throughout all of Israel, my queen.
Who dares speak to the king of Israel this way?
It is Elijah, prophet of the Lord.
You have done evil in the sight of the Lord. You have built temples and altars to the false god Baal, and have done more to make the Lord God of Israel angry than any king of Israel before you.
Prophet,
I am the servant of the living Lord, the God of Israel, and I swear in his name that it won't rain except at my word. There won't even be any dew on the ground.
I don't need your God for rain, prophet. Do you really think him a match for Baal, the god of weather?
Increase the sacrifices until Baal hears our pleas for rain. Then bring me the man responsible for this drought.
And if you find any other prophets of the Lord, kill them!
Search everywhere, but find Elijah.
Here we saw how Elijah comes and confronts Ahab. Then God tells Elijah, because they're searching for Elijah, King Jezebel is now, even King Ahab is searching for Elijah. So God tells Elijah to travel east and hide in a Kerit's ravine. And there he gets water, he gets food from the ravens, and he was just living his life there. God told him to stay there hidden, but there was no dew, no rain, nothing. And so then the people, the animals, the crops, everything started dying. It was extreme drought. Now, the place where Elijah was drinking water, even the water was dried up. So now God tells him, now from Kerith, now I want want you to go to a place called Zarephath. And in Zarephath, God had prepared a widow and a son. So there was a widow and a son. As we see here, they were just collecting woods, maybe a firewood for their cooking. And Elijah goes and meets this widow at Zarephath. Elijah meets them and tells them, can you please give me some food? For that, the widow says, we have very little flour and we have very little oil. We were just collecting firewood so that we'll just cook our last meal, eat it, and then we might die. But Elijah tells, I want you to make a bread and first give it to me. So then the widow makes the bread and gives it to Elijah. But when they saw, God did not leave them at all. The flour never got used up and the oil never got used up. Until there was drought, this widow and her son always had food and they were so happy. But what happens? One day the son falls sick and the widow is so upset. She thinks maybe she did something wrong. She made a mistake. There's a man of God in her house and now maybe something is wrong. She's so sad. But she calls Elijah and tells, why did my boy stop breathing? Why did he die? Elijah takes him to the upper room, the room that was made for him, and prays for the person, and the boy wakes up. And then he gives the boy to the mother, and the mother and the son are so happy there. So what we see about this widow and the son, they were almost at their last days. They were cooking their last meal. They did not have anything in hand. But when they obeyed and gave food to Elijah the prophet, then God blessed them, gave them food forever. He even resurrected the boy from death after his illness. Let's come back to the main story of our kings. What's happening here? Now they are in the 3rd year of the famine. No rains at all. In spite of Jezebel calling that Baal is the god of weather, no rains because the living God of Israel has stopped rain. And then Elijah actually meets a person called Obadiah. Obadiah is a person, he was a palace administrator with the evil king Ahab. We are talking about King Ahab, right? So the evil king Ahab, Obadiah was a palace administrator for him, but he was a very devout believer of the Lord. He almost, when Jezebel was killing the prophets, he hid 100 prophets, gave them food and everything. Now King Ahab says, go find some food. There is no food at all. And when he was searching, he meets Elijah. And Elijah tells him, you know what? Now is the day. Since the day he confronted Ahab earlier, Elijah tells, I am going to come and meet the king Ahab. And this is going to happen at a place called Mount Carmel. Okay, so what's happening? Let's look into it. Even the earlier video that you saw and the other videos that you're going to see now, all are from Superbook series, where we see almost 2 little children and a robot, all of them going along and experiencing what is happening in the scripture, in the stories. Okay, so you'll see some new characters also there. And we see that Elijah comes to Mount Carmel. He calls the king and tells, you have 450 prophets for Baal, right? And I am the only prophet, only one person for God. Now let's do something. Let's take 2 bulls. Your prophets for the king, for the god Baal can also give sacrifice, and I will also do the same. Let's see, the God who answers by fire is the living God. Okay, so this is what we're going to see in the next few videos at Mount Carmel. Let's watch.
So
That's a sign.
Yes, see if you can pick up any strange life scan readings. I am happy to report that there are no life scan readings of any kind from Bael's idol or altar.
We come before you on this mountaintop, O Baal! You are great, and we are your humble servants. Come down.
I would have thought something would have happened by now.
Pray louder! Baal must be a god! Maybe he's daydreaming! Using the toilet! Or traveling somewhere! Or maybe he's asleep! Shh! And you have to wake him up! O Lord, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, prove today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant. Prove that I have done all this at your command, O Lord. Answer me. Answer me so these people will know that you, O Lord, are God, and that you have brought them back to yourself.
After this, that everybody, it was proven that the God of Israel is the living God. Elijah tells them to kill the prophets of Baal. And then Elijah prays to the Lord for rain. And then they see a small cloud, and then there was rain. And he tells the king, take your chariot, go back home. The rain shouldn't stop you. And Elijah runs before the chariot and goes. And then there was rain. But still, Jezebel was so angry that the prophets were killed, and so she again searched for Elijah. Elijah again runs away, but God gives him food. He takes him to a place called Horeb, and there God meets Elijah and tells him, what are you doing here? And then Elijah, he tells that I'm going to come and meet you. There was a powerful wind, and God was not there. Earthquake, God was not there. Fire, God was not there. But there was a whisper, and in that whisper, Elijah met God. He saw the presence of the God. And then God again told him, Elijah, don't stop. Proceed. You still have a lot of work to do. You have to anoint Hazael as king over Aram. You have to anoint Jehu, the next king of Israel. And you have to make Elisha the next prophet after you. So Elijah goes and calls Elisha to be the prophet. So we will later see about what Elisha does. So Elijah makes Elisha a prophet. Then when we see King Ahab, right? King Ahab had many ups and downs. He does different things. But this one thing I want to highlight is Naboth's vineyard. So what do we see in Naboth's vineyard? So just, it is almost, this king stands and sees a vineyard. He sees, so it's so beautiful, he wants to buy it, but it belongs to another person. He goes and tells the person, sell it to me, but he says, no, it's my inheritance. As per the law, as per God, I should not sell my inheritance to you. But he's so upset. But the king Jezebel, who's so evil, she sends out an evil plan, and he kills Naboth and gives the vineyard to King Ahab. Ahab is so happy, he's just going and taking a vineyard. But again, we see Elijah coming here and telling, you did something wrong. You're the king, you have everything. Why do you want this vineyard? But then this one first time we see that Ahab actually humbles himself and says, Lord, I'm so sorry about this. And God also was gracious to him and says, you have been evil. There will be an effect of the sin, but still God was actually relenting because he humbled himself. So now we see this evil king Ahab ruling over Israel. We actually are going to now hear about a new name called Jehoshaphat, who is the son of King Asa, who is now ruling over Judah. Suddenly, you see, initially there was problem and then the kingdom split, but now we see these two kings become friends. They sit together and go for a war. But what happens whenever they go for a war, they're supposed to call a prophet and ask them what's to be done. So, but Ahab, the evil king, did not want to know about the truth. Then there were few false prophets who were trying to give him a twisted truth. They were telling Ahab, you go, you'll win. But then there was King Jehoshaphat, the king of Judah, who wanted truth, but he wanted it on his side. But then we see a man of God called Micaiah, who came and actually told the truth that King Ahab, when you go for this war, you are going to die. Okay, whatever may be our attitude towards truth, but still, right? Truth reveals our heart. And we see that King Ahab goes to this war and he is killed exactly as the man of God told. So now we're just going to do a recap. I'm just overshooting time, but just few more minutes and we'll be done. So we saw that King David had a golden heart. Then Solomon's age was the best. He built the temple for the Lord, but then he lost when he turned away from God. Then the nation splits and things are becoming worse. Some places like in Asa and Jehoshaphat, we see that things are better also. So this is what is happening to the chosen people, Israel. So now let's see what's happening with the king, subjects, land, and relationships. There are multiple kings again. Subjects is Israel and the land. Now the chosen people have now living in a divided kingdom, and their relationships are broken with the Lord. So what do we see about kings? In Deuteronomy, long back, when God gave Moses instructions for everybody, he even gave instructions for the king and told, you have to revere, kings should revere God, kings should follow God, kings should obey God. They should not think of themselves as somebody so special than others, but they should serve the Lord along with everybody. But these kings forgot that who was the boss. These kings thought that they were the powerful people. They forgot that God is the ruler of everybody. So we need to remember on who is our king. Okay, now let's come back to us living in 2020. Do we have kings? Oh no, we might say, oh no, we don't have kings. We live in a democratic country. Do we have idols? No. We are all Christians. We're all children of God. We don't have idols in our home. We don't have a golden calf. We don't worship them. But you know what? Can you just sit and think about, do you have different sorts of idols in your life? God has blessed you with a family, but does your family become more than God? God gives you money to take care of you. Does your money become more than God? Your culture, power, success, comfort. God gives you wisdom and makes you study, but when you succeed, does it become an idol for you? So in 2020, when we are living, all these things that we learned about these kings, the good ones and the evil ones, it's still relatable to us. We all have a choice to turn to the Lord or turn to our idols. What choice do we take? What choice should we be taking? We are called to serve as a leader. I wouldn't use the word king here, but every one of you listening here are a leader for Christ. And who are we called to imitate? We are called to imitate the servant king. Who is the servant king? Jesus Christ himself. He being God, but still came to the world, not as a king, but as a person who came to serve the world. We, each and every one of us sitting here, are called to imitate our servant king. Let's bow down for a word of prayer. Father God, we learnt about so many kings. The divided kingdom of Israel, because they turned away from you, got split. Even though you called and promised Jeroboam to be a king, the moment he became king, he forgot you. He created idols. He sinned. He made everybody sin. So, Lord, in 2020, this year, today, how does it relate to me? I might say I don't have kings, but do I have idols? Lord, show me what my idol is. Lord, show me if I have any idol. Is comfort my idol? Is success my idol? Is my family my idol? Does any of these things come above you? Lord, help me to remove my idols and turn to you. You are our only king, the only servant king who came to serve others. Help us to serve each and every one of them around us, just as you did, and always worship you alone and remove the idols from our lives. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Thank you, everyone. Let's meet again next week.